In 1612, on a small island off the coast of Japan, the most anticipated duel in samurai history was about to begin. On one side, Sasaki Kojiro, the finest swordsman in Western Japan, master of the swallow cut, a technique so fast it was said to split a bird mid-flight. 3,000 spectators had gathered to watch him fight. On the other side, Miyamoto Musashi, who arrived 2 hours late, disheveled, holding a wooden sword he had carved from his boat oar on the way across the water. Kojiro was furious. The crowd was furious. Musashi looked at him calmly, said nothing. The duel lasted seconds. Kojiro was dead before he hit the ground. Musashi bowed, walked back to his boat, left. 60 duels, 0 defeats. No formal school, no noble lineage, no master who trained him from birth. What Musashi had instead was a philosophy, 5 principles that governed every decision, every action, every thought. Principles he spent his entire life refining and wrote down in the final days before his death. This video is those 5 principles, not as history, as a manual for how you think, how you act, and how you face whatever is in front of you right now. Subscribe and let's begin. Principle 1. Mushin, the empty mind. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. Miyamoto Musashi. Before his duel with Kojiro, Musashi did something that confused everyone who witnessed it. He slept. On the boat crossing to Ganryu Island, while his companions sat rigid with anticipation, Musashi closed his eyes and slept deeply. His handlers had to shake him awake when they arrived. He stretched, carved his wooden sword from the oar, and walked to the beach without hurry. This wasn't arrogance. It wasn't disrespect. It was Mushin. Mushin, written with the characters for know and mind, is the state of complete mental emptiness. No anticipation, no fear, no internal commentary, no attachment to outcome. The mind rests in pure readiness, like water before it moves. Most people enter high-pressure situations carrying the full weight of what might happen. They rehearse scenarios, they calculate odds, they feel the fear of failure before failure has occurred. And that mental noise, that constant internal conversation, is precisely what slows them down. Musashi understood something that modern neuroscience would confirm 4 centuries later. Conscious thought is slower than instinct. When you overthink, you activate the prefrontal cortex, the brain's deliberate, analytical system. Precise, but slow. In a sword fight, slow means dead. In any high-stakes moment, slow means you've already lost the edge. Mushin bypasses this entirely. It drops the deliberate mind and operates from a deeper layer, what researchers now call the flow state, a condition where action and awareness merge completely, where you stop performing and start simply being. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying this state in athletes, surgeons, musicians, and chess grandmasters. His finding, peak performance doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from trying less, from removing the ego's interference and letting trained instinct take over. Musashi knew this in 1600. He achieved Mushin through a specific practice, radical presence. Before every duel, he cleared his mind not by forcing calm, but by removing future and past entirely. There was only this moment, this ground, this opponent. Nothing else existed. You don't need a sword to apply this. Every time you sit down to work and immediately start thinking about whether the work will be good enough, whether people will approve, whether you're wasting your time, that is the opposite of Mushin. That is your ego inserting itself between you and the task. The practice is simple and demanding. Do the thing completely. One thing. No audience in your head, no evaluation running in the background. Just the work, fully met, with nothing withheld. Musashi called it, think lightly of yourself. Not because you don't matter, but because self-consciousness is the enemy of mastery. When the ego goes quiet, something deeper takes over. That's where real capability lives. Principle 2. Accept everything just as it is. Do not seek to possess either goods or fiefs for your old age. Do not fear death. Miyamoto Musashi, Dokkōdō. In the winter of 1000, 600, Musashi fought on the losing side at the Battle of Sekigahara. He was 16 years old. He survived by hiding among corpses for 2 days before escaping under the cover of darkness. When he emerged, everything he had fought for was gone. The clan he had served was defeated. The future he had imagined didn't exist. Most men in that position chose one of 2 responses: despair or obsessive revenge. Musashi chose neither. He accepted what was, completely, without labeling it a disaster or injustice. He looked at the reality in front of him. He was alive, alone, and free, and began walking. That walk lasted decades. He wandered Japan as a ronin, a masterless samurai, fighting anyone who challenged him, studying everything he encountered. He had no home, no employer, no security. What he had was an absolute refusal to resist what was real. This is the second principle: accept everything just as it is. Not passively, not as resignation. Musashi wasn't a man who surrendered to circumstances. He was a man who stopped wasting energy fighting reality and redirected every ounce of that energy into responding to it. The Stoics called this the dichotomy of control. Epictetus, writing from slavery in Rome around the same era, put it plainly: we cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them. Musashi arrived at the same principle through blood. The practical mechanism is this: when something goes wrong, the mind has 2 options. It can argue with reality, insisting the situation should be different, cycling through what could have been, building a case against what is. Or it can accept the situation as simply true and move immediately to what can be done. The first option feels productive. It isn't. It consumes the exact mental energy needed to respond effectively. Think about the last time something didn't go as planned. A project failed, a relationship ended, an opportunity closed. How much time did you spend in the mental loop of this shouldn't have happened? That loop is the real damage, not the event itself. Musashi's discipline wasn't in gritting his teeth through difficulty. It was in refusing to add mental suffering on top of practical difficulty. The situation is what it is. Now, what do you do? This isn't coldness. Musashi felt loss. He felt failure. He wrote about both. The discipline was in not letting those feelings become the story he told himself about his life. Accept, assess, act. That sequence practiced daily, in small things before large ones, is what he called a complete warrior's mind. Musashi once wrote that those who understand these principles early spend their lives building. Those who discover them late spend their lives recovering. If this is landing for you, you're on the right side of that line. Stay with us. Principle 3. Do not regret what you have done. Regret is an appalling waste of energy. You can't build on it. It's only good for wallowing in. Catherine Mansfield. In 1645, 2 weeks before his death, Miyamoto Musashi wrote the Dokkōdō, The Path of Aloneness. 21 precepts. The distilled wisdom of a life lived entirely on his own terms. Precept 4. Do not regret what you have done. Not because Musashi made no mistakes. He made many. He was late to duels. He abandoned relationships. He chose the path of the sword over comfort, family, and stability, and there were costs to that choice that he acknowledged clearly. But regret was something he refused entirely. The distinction Musashi drew was precise. Guilt is useful. Regret is not. Guilt says, I did something wrong, I understand why, I will do differently. It processes and moves forward. It is information. Regret says, I did something wrong and I cannot stop thinking about it. It loops. It anchors the mind to a moment that no longer exists. It consumes the present capacity to process a past that cannot be changed. For Musashi, a mind caught in regret was a mind that could not respond to what was actually happening. In a duel that cost your life. In daily life, it costs something equally important, the ability to act clearly in the present. This is not a philosophy of avoidance. Musashi didn't recommend ignoring mistakes. He recommended processing them completely, understanding what happened and why, and then releasing them without remainder. Modern cognitive science calls excessive regret rumination. Repeated studies show it as one of the strongest predictors of anxiety and depression, not because the original event was severe, but because the mental repetition of that event creates neural pathways that become increasingly automatic. The brain, in effect, practices the suffering. Musashi's prescription was behavioral. Once you have understood a mistake, act immediately. Do something in the present that reflects what you learned. The action interrupts the loop. The forward movement is itself the release. His own life demonstrated this ruthlessly. After Sekigahara, he didn't grieve the loss for years. He walked, he trained, he fought, he built something new from what remained. The question isn't whether you made mistakes. The question is whether you are still living inside them. Principle 4. Never be jealous. It is difficult to understand the universe if you only study one planet. Miyamoto Musashi. Musashi never had a teacher. This is almost incomprehensible in the context of feudal Japan, where every serious swordsman trained under a recognized master within an established school. Lineage was everything. The technique was passed down through years of formal instruction. Musashi rejected all of it. Not out of arrogance, out of clarity. He understood that if he spent his life measuring himself against other swordsmen, comparing his progress to theirs, feeling inadequate when they advanced faster, or threatened when they developed something he hadn't, he would be forever oriented toward them rather than toward mastery itself. Jealousy, Musashi recognized, is a form of outsourcing your direction. When you are jealous of someone else's position, progress, or recognition, you have handed them control of your attention. Their life becomes the standard against which you measure your own. And since you can never fully inhabit their circumstances, their advantages, or their path, you are perpetually measuring yourself against something you cannot accurately assess. The samurai who obsessed over Musashi's reputation, and there were many, spent their energy tracking him rather than training themselves. That division of attention was itself a form of defeat before the duel began. In the age of social media, this principle has never been more difficult or more necessary. The feed is an unending stream of other people's highlight reels, curated achievements, filtered success, visible progress. Every scroll is an invitation to compare. And comparison, when it produces jealousy rather than inspiration, does exactly what Musashi warned against. It pulls your focus from your own path and locks it onto someone else's. The discipline here is directional. Every time you notice jealousy, and notice is the operative word, not suppress, ask one question. What does this tell me about what I actually want? Jealousy is not useless. It is information about desire. The problem is when it stops at wanting what someone else has and becomes a reason to feel less than, rather than a signal to move towards something real. Musashi's focus was absolute. 60 duels, 0 defeats, decades of solitary training. Not because he was oblivious to others, but because he had decided that his path was his own and that nobody else's progress could accelerate or delay what he was building. That decision is available to you, every day. Musashi spent 40 years building a philosophy that most people only discover after decades of going the wrong direction. If you want to keep thinking this way, subscribe. This is what this channel is for. Principle 5. Know your path and walk it alone. The true science of martial arts means practicing them in such a way that they will be useful at any time. Miyamoto Musashi. At age 50, Miyamoto Musashi walked into a cave called Raigando and didn't come out for 2 years. No students, no duels, no obligations. Just Musashi, a brush, ink, and complete solitude. What he produced in that cave, the Book of 5 Rings, one of the most studied strategic texts in history, still taught in business schools and military academies 4 centuries later, and the Dokkōdō, his final personal code, written 9 days before he died. He had spent his entire adult life in motion, traveling, fighting, teaching briefly, moving on. The cave was the culmination, the place where everything he had learned and lived crystallized into something transmissible. The 21st and final precept of the Dokkōdō reads, "Never stray from the way." This is the principle that holds all others together. Musashi's way, his do, was not a destination, it was a direction. a commitment to continuous refinement, to seeing clearly, to acting without ego interference, to accepting what was real and moving through it without complaint. He didn't achieve this by age 30 and maintain it. He built it progressively, through every duel, every loss, every year of solitary practice. The cave at 50 wasn't isolated from the world. It was the natural endpoint of a life spent in deliberate direction. The modern version of this principle is more difficult because the world actively discourages it. Every system around you is designed to pull your attention outward. Notifications, opinions, trends, the constant measurement of your worth against external benchmarks. To walk your own path in this environment is not a passive act. It requires daily, active choice. Musashi's mechanism was simple. He returned, constantly, to what he was actually building, not what others thought of it, not how it compared to anyone else's work. Not whether it would be recognized, but whether it was true, whether it reflected his clearest understanding of what he was trying to master. That internal compass is what he called the way. You already have one, most people do. The question is whether you consult it or abandon it every time external pressure suggests a different direction. Musashi never abandoned his, not at Sekigahara when everything collapsed, not during decades of poverty and rootlessness. Not when the most celebrated swordsman in Japan dismissed him as a wandering ronin with no school and no credentials. He walked his path, alone if necessary, until the end. The cave at Raigando was not where he went to hide. It was where he went to finish what he started. Principle 6. Master one thing, know 10,000. From one thing, know 10,000 things. Miyamoto Musashi, The Book of Five Rings. Musashi's final principle is the one most misunderstood. When he said, "Devote yourself to one way," people hear limitation. Narrow yourself, ignore everything else, pick a lane, and never look up. That is the opposite of what he meant. Musashi himself was living proof. He was an undefeated swordsman, yes, but also a painter whose works hang in Japanese museums today, a sculptor, a calligrapher, a strategist whose military principles were studied by Tokugawa generals, a philosopher whose writing is still read globally. He didn't achieve breadth by spreading his attention across many things simultaneously. He achieved it by going so deep into one thing that the underlying patterns became visible, and those patterns transferred everywhere. When you master something completely, truly completely, not superficially, you learn how to learn. You develop a relationship with difficulty that is transferable. You understand what depth feels like, what the gap between competence and mastery actually contains, and how to sit with not knowing long enough to break through to understanding. Musashi's swordsmanship taught him strategy. His strategy taught him to paint. His painting taught him philosophy. Each discipline was a different surface for the same underlying principles: presence, empty mind, acceptance, and forward movement without ego. The modern equivalent is this: if you are scattered across 10 things simultaneously, you never go deep enough into any of them to access the transferable layer. You accumulate surface-level competence in many things and mastery in nothing. And surface-level competence, Musashi would say, is not enough. Not because mastery brings external recognition, though it often does. Because the process of achieving mastery changes you in ways that nothing else can. It builds a relationship with sustained difficulty. It teaches you what your mind does when it wants to quit. It shows you who you are when there is no shortcut available. That self-knowledge, Musashi argued, is the real prize. From one thing, truly mastered, you come to know 10,000. The warrior's final lesson. 9 days before he died, Musashi picked up his brush one final time. He wrote the Dokkōdō in a single sitting. 21 precepts. No elaboration, no stories, no justification. Just the principles stripped to their bones. The last line, "Never stray from the way." He gave the manuscript to a student, went back to his cave, died 9 days later at age 60, sitting upright, in the posture of meditation. 60 duels, 0 defeats, a philosophy written in the final days of a life lived entirely on its own terms. The 5 principles in this video aren't complicated. They never were. Empty your mind and act from what's real. Accept what is, and move through it. Release regret the moment it stops being useful. Stay on your own path. Go deep into one thing until everything becomes clear. Simple, not easy. Musashi spent 40 years learning them through blood, solitude, and complete commitment to a single direction. You don't have to live in a cave. You don't have to fight 60 duels. But you do have to choose. Every day, in small things before large ones, you choose whether you operate from fear or from presence, from comparison or from your own direction, from regret or from forward movement. That choice, made consistently over the years, is what Musashi meant by the way. It doesn't end, it just deepens. Comment, seek nothing outside of yourself. Subscribe for warrior philosophy and the hard truths about what it takes to master your own mind. Musashi spent his life walking one path, completely. The question is whether you're willing to find yours.